me, the only way to mentally survive a place like this is to have strict discipline and routine. This is a place designed to break you down.
Especially considering this was once labeled as the toughest paramilitary jail in the United States.
We had no contraband, we had no problems. Of course, we ran a paramilitary, so it had to be military cleanliness, military inspections. Inmates went to attention. Every inmate was responsible for cleaning the cell.
You are corrupt, and that you broke the 8th Amendment, you broke the 14th Amendment, and you are solely responsible for the conditions that he has right now. You let one guy get murdered in the cell in Clayton County, they put DOJ right over there. You got, what, over 7 people dead in Clayton County Jail? What do you do then? We're going to go ahead and break down every lie, every failure, and every red flag buried in that video.
Hill of Justice is sponsored and produced by Jermaine Delmas Studios.
One video, 48 minutes. A jail in Georgia. And within hours, millions of people were watching inside Atlanta's craziest jail on YouTube with the same stunned expression. Is this real? Especially considering this was once labeled as the toughest paramilitary jail in the United States, headed by that guy over there. We're talking about Clayton County Jail in Georgia. We're unpacking the video, we're exposing it, and what wasn't exposed. More importantly, we're naming names. We're tracing the blood trails from the broken leadership to the broken bodies. We're going to go ahead and break down every lie, every failure, and every red flag buried in that video. The documentary just didn't go viral. It detonated. And we're going to go ahead and walk straight into the blast zone because we walked through that jail many times, especially yours truly. Brother, let's get to it. So, what was your thoughts initially when you first saw the video?
Well, I was in shock. There was video footage being sent to me by employees all the time, trying to explain to me just how bad the jail had gotten. They tried to tell me, I didn't say I didn't believe them, but anytime they could get footage inside the jail, they would send it to me because the jail literally took a 180. As you said, it was once known as Georgia's toughest paramilitary jail. It was the cleanest jail. It was the safest jail. We never had any escapes. We never had any murders. People died of natural causes, of course. There's no way to control when the lawyer's going to call somebody home. But as far as an inmate murdering another inmate, that never happened in 15 years I was sheriff. As far as an inmate escaping, that never happened when I was sheriff. And then when this guy took over, there were several escapes, riots, stabbings, gang rapes, infestation with drugs. That's another thing about the jail. We didn't have any drugs. We didn't have any cell phones. And a lot of people are like, nah, that can't be. Well, let me tell you, it was. And I can prove it. And there's documentation. It was. Not only do we have video footage, but you got to understand 4 times a year, a grand jury would come and tour that jail. And we would show it to them. And at no time did they ever go through there and inhale drugs or see a cell phone or see contraband. And it wasn't rocket science. All I did was stop everyone from entering that jail except they went in one entrance. I put a camera there and filmed it, and everyone, including me, had to be searched. And if you went outside and took a smoke break, guess what? You came back, you were searched again. So if somebody wasn't searched, it's on video. And I had access to that camera where I could just pick up my phone and look at it live to see if the searches was being done. And just based on that and some other ironclad tactics, or iron fist, if you want to call it that, we had no contraband. We had no problems. Of course, we ran a paramilitary, so it had to be military cleanliness, military inspections. Inmates went to attention. Every inmate was responsible for cleaning the cell. It was like night and day. Fortunately, we have video footage of that. We have video footage of inmates going to attention saying, "Sir, yes, sir." We have video footage of a guy named Too Tall that was in the Fulton County Jail, and he was stomping people and out of control. Then you see him in my jail, and he's going to attention, and he's following orders. So, that was a feeble attempt to make it look like the guys who are in charge now inherited a crazy jail, but he didn't. He inherited a jail that was actually intact. And unfortunately, he allowed the jail to get that way.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room.
Sure.
Not only did we know that, you're a polarizing figure and also controversial, but they're trying to go ahead and make it seem like you are corrupt and that you broke the 8th Amendment, you broke the 14th Amendment, and you are solely responsible for the conditions that he has right now. What do you say about that?
So let me tell you what I got to say about that. First of all, the whole case against me was a contrived, politically concocted case. For those who haven't had a chance to research, I wrote a whole book on it. It's called Vigilante Sheriff, The Truth About Corrupt Prosecutors Weaponizing the Criminal Justice System. And it talks about the relationship with the Clayton County DA's office and how they've been constantly trying to find a way to get me out so she could get her friend in. Basically, that's what it's about. When this charge came upon me, it was a civil rights violation. And they claimed that by me putting inmates in a restraint chair, I violated their constitutional rights. Here's what a lot of people don't know. I'm the first in the history of the country to ever be charged with ordering the use of the restraint chair. Ordering it. I didn't put them in a restraint chair. I never touched them. I said, these people need to be restrained. Matter of fact, one of the persons that actually put them in the chair, and he's on video strapping them in the chair, is the guy who's the sheriff now. The one who exactly. Yeah, he's on film strapping these people in the chair.
Oh, no, they're mad at you about the 17-year-old, the one who was mentally ill, who has that capacity.
When they tore up his mother's house or whatever. Exactly.
Yeah, they're pissed off at you about that. What about that?
Guess what? Guess who called me that night and told me, hey, we got a guy that needs to be placed in a restraint chair? The guy who's the sheriff now. It's on a text message. So don't you think it's mighty strange that if I never physically touch any inmate, matter of fact, I don't think I've ever had physical contact with an inmate except one I let out of jail and he reached out and hugged me and it caught me off guard, so I just hugged him back. But if I didn't physically put them into the jail, then how could I injure them or do anything to them? And if the guys who put them in the jail injured them, why weren't they indicted? Why weren't they charged? So there's no case in the history of the United States like it. I'm the first in the history of the United States to simply be charged because they said I violated their criminal rights by ordering them in the use of restraint chair. And then they came out with something no one ever heard of before. They said, well, they weren't uncontrollably violent at the time you put them in the chair. So that's a civil rights violation because that's what the policy says. Well, you can look at that policy, and the policy clearly says that's one reason. It also says you can put them in the chair for preventive reasons, to prevent them from destroying property, to prevent them from hurting themselves, to prevent them from harming others. And how do we know who needs to be put in the chair? Easy, because they show pre-attack indicators. So if you look at all of the times that chair has been used, that chair was used a total of 630 times when I was the sheriff. The only time it was deemed illegal is the 8 times that I said it. So how do you explain this? If 630 people were in a chair, how is it that the only time I ordered them in a chair is the only time anyone was injured? Prior to that case they brought against me, we had never had a civil suit on it. We'd never had a complaint. No one never said they were injured. There were no injuries. But isn't it interesting that the 7 people I'm accused of putting in a restraint chair, who was put in a chair by other people, all of them suddenly urinated on themselves and were injured. Now, here's another thing people don't know. These 7 people never made a complaint. They went and found them. They came to the sheriff's office and said, show us every use of force report with Sheriff Hill's name on it. So they skipped off 630 reports of the 630 times the chair were used, and they only wanted to see the ones that had my name on it. Then they went and contacted these people. Hey, were you in the restraint chair? Was there any pain? Did you feel any discomfort? You know what? You're a victim. We're going to drop your charges. You know what? We think you could sue and get some money. So think about that. These guys were in jail. One of them in there who had been out over a year, never said they were injured, never complained. And it's only till they get a knock at the door, a phone call, and all of a sudden, you know what? Yeah, I'm a victim. You know what? I think I remember urinating on myself. You know what? Yeah, I think I felt some pain. Now think about this too. Okay, if they urinated on themselves, where's the decontamination report? Where's the reports of the fact that whether or not they changed their uniforms or not? Because that would have to happen. There have to be a decontamination report to change the uniform. No evidence at all. If you look at pictures of these guys, there's no evidence on their clothes that they urinated on themselves, nothing. Now, here's what a lot of people don't understand about the trial. Well, you should have beat that at trial. You're absolutely right. I should have beat it at trial. But guess why? It turns out that the judge that had the case is friends with who pushed the case. Who? The DA. The judge was Facebook friends with one of my political opponents. The judge's husband used to work with this DA. So they had a relationship. And so, when you get a case and you have a judge, the judge is supposed to be a referee. Hey, this, and that. But when you got a judge pushing for a conviction, when you got a judge that's not allowing us to present exculpatory evidence, I'm probably mispronouncing that. A judge that refused to let the victims that we want to testify. A judge that when the jury is hung, she calls out the man who they identified as not wanting to vote for a guilty conviction, calls him out not once but twice, and coerces him into finally giving in after the man said, I'm being yelled at, screamed at, I'm being called names. How possibly could that be a fair trial? It was probably one of the most textbook examples of a kangaroo trial in the history of the Northern District here in Georgia.
So do you think that the public knows the real truth about what went on inside those walls? Because we are talking about right now, we have a viral video out of inmates, walking around with shanks and being videotaped, gang members throwing up all types of signs.
I will say, yes, I will say the public knows the truth. Are you talking about, do they know the truth of what was going on behind the walls when I was sheriff, or what's going on behind the walls now?
Do you think that you caused your own demise? And this is what I'm asking about. Why?
Sure.
Because you did not go ahead and speak to the press. And because you didn't get your side out initially. What do you think about that?
It's so interesting you should bring that up, because I've had this debate with a couple of friends of mine, because the press recently reached out to me for an interview, actually yesterday, and they're like, you should talk to them. Here's what I think people don't understand about the press. You can sit down and talk to the press for 30 minutes, and they may pick out 3 minutes of what you said and put it in whatever context you want to say. So
they're going to do it on this shit. They're going to do it here.
Exactly. Well, actually, they ended up doing it to the guy who's a sheriff now. Well, I don't think that it's not the press; it's a documentary. But actually, I don't think what he wanted to happen actually happened. I don't think people looked at it and thought, "Okay, oh my God, this guy's a hero, and he needs $10 million." All of the feedback we got is it's the worst jail, and they probably need a new sheriff. So that backfired on them. Well, a lot of times when you go and you talk to the press and you think you're getting your story out, you're not going to get your story out. You can have an hour-long press conference, and at the 6 o'clock news, they're only going to play the part of the press conference that they think they can make to get some ratings, especially if they think they can misconstrue it to make you look bad. So they're a waste of time anyway. And there's plenty of times I've talked to the media when I used to talk to them to get the truth out, and they never put the truth out anyway. You can lie by omission or you can lie by commission. I actually write a whole chapter about them in that book and their relationship and false prosecutions and their what we call Robert Ford syndrome relationship with prosecutors as well. But if you think that getting the truth out, you can't go to the liar to get the truth out. If a person has put out a lie, how can going to the liar who put out the lie, how can you depend on them to put out the truth?
Right.
That's a waste of time.
Right. So we're taking a look at Tommy G, and at this point in time, he does one of these things. He does a documentary. He's not a journalist, right?
Right.
And so he's not asking, the current sheriff exactly how could it be that this other jail, that the Clayton County Jail ran by this person did not have these issues, and then all of a sudden it is exploding in criminality. So I thought that, and I reached out, just to be fair, I reached out to Tommy G and his representatives. They haven't hit me up back yet, but the moment they do, we'll get them on here so they can go ahead and tell their side of the story. But I thought that it wasn't balanced. I thought it was just really leveled out, more so to the current sheriff's side. And I think that that's because he got access from him. So he's going to make him look a certain way.
I didn't quite get that from that. I didn't get that it was balanced out either way. I think Tommy G did it the way, I think what he wanted to do is show a crazy out of control jail. I think the sheriff probably wanted, I think, first of all, it's hard to say why he would do that, because that did not make him look good. It did not make him look competent. Nobody came away from that thinking, wow, this is a great guy. We need to give him $10 million. I think that might have been his objective. Maybe he wanted the commissioners to look like they're not funding him. Maybe he wanted to look like, hey, it was this feared, ruthless sheriff that left him in a bad predicament. And we know that's not the case. I mean, that's another situation we'll have to talk about, because he actually begged. Well, he actually was on the phone crying, asking me to help him be sheriff, and saying, "Help me, please. I'll give it back. I'll give it back." But I think that's what he wants to put out there, but I don't think it was successful. I think maybe if a person doesn't know Clayton County, maybe they may have a few questions, but even people that we've talked to that has nothing to do, that don't really know me or him, I don't think they got that from the situation at all. All the people in Clayton County, they either been in that jail or know someone who's been in that jail. And they knew how it was when I was sheriff, and they know it's different. If we was to have a vote in that jail today, I think the inmates would vote the ones for me to come back so they could be safe again. I can't tell you how many inmates I've had get out the jail and call me and tell me what's happened. You've met two of them. Two of them you met that was actually in the jail, and they were so appalled. And remember what they told me, and you cracked up laughing and said, "We never thought we'd get in touch with you. We used to think you was hard. Now we understand why you were hard, because we've never seen nothing like this a day in my life,"
Right. Now we got a philosophical question, okay? More so as, it's always this. Do you think the prisoners created those conditions, or is it the lack of care from leadership, management, and with the guards, especially now that we found out and we know that the rot
not
is
the
within?
prisoners. It's not the prisoners. Listen, there's a video. You can see it. It's on my Facebook page. Too Tall was on 60 Days In, and he was one of the featured guys in that jail because he was running the jail. And then we got a video. He ended up in my jail, and he acted completely different. It's because of the command and control. Okay, the atmosphere of that jail is controlled by the leadership and the guards. So whatever you see in a jail is allowed to be going on. Inmates don't bring drugs into the jail. How can they? Drugs don't float into the jail. Anytime you see drugs in the jail, those drugs are brought in by employees. Guards, unfortunately, sometimes maintenance people or nurses or whatever like that. Here's what I think a lot of people need to understand, and they need to understand about the case that was brought against me. Most of the witnesses that came and testified against me, I would say 95% were people I fired. And that was something else that didn't come out. That jury didn't realize that they were listening to people that I had fired. I have a reputation for firing people. I fired more people than I can remember. And here's what people don't understand. When you run a jail, you have to run it with an iron fist. There's a reason I was handing out suspensions and terminations like the Easter Bunny hands out candy. Because if I did, then the jail would be like it is now. Because it's the guards I have to keep in line. Because if I don't, they're going to bring drugs. They're going to bring contraband. They're going to abuse people or beat people up. So anytime there was an inkling of that, suspension, termination, that's the only way you can keep order. If you don't do that, then you get the absolute chaos that you got now. Well, unfortunately, when you terminate people, even though you're correct in terminating them, that still doesn't make them happy and doesn't make you a friend. I don't think I've ever arrested a person or terminated a person and they went away with a warm, googly feeling saying, I'm glad you fired me. I'm glad you arrested me. I shouldn't have killed that guy. I shouldn't have broken the house. I'm glad you did that. I have never gotten that. Maybe years later, when they've gotten older, I've had a few people come back and say, you know what, that's probably the best thing that happened, but never at that time.
Right.
And I don't think I've ever had an employee do that. Well, think about it. Everyone that came to testify was people I fired or people I arrested.
Right. What about the connective tissue where people will go ahead and say, guess what? This was a ticking time bomb. Do you accept any responsibility for the culture that exists right now? Because they could say, hey, guess what? The paramilitary style set this over the edge.
Absolutely not. They knew better than to bring drugs when I was there. They knew better. It's interesting that after this case was brought, it probably wasn't 3 months, not 3 months, it wasn't probably 3 weeks before drugs started getting into the jail. And, everything kind of like has a jungle mentality. Even lions, they don't pick the strongest, fastest prey. They look for one that's weak. They look for one that's old, because they're not trying to run real fast. Well, criminals are the same way. They can sense weakness. And once I was gone, they knew they didn't have anything to fear, especially with the guy who's there now. And, there's a difference. Let me just say this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Clayton County is not Mayberry. We don't have Otises, as you can tell by that just turn themselves in and lock themselves in the cell when they get drunk, and then you can let them out later. Clayton County is a whole different animal, as you can see. Barney Fife cannot be the sheriff of Clayton County. It's a whole different world. And what you're seeing now is the difference between having Barney Fife as a sheriff and having a real sheriff.
Right.
That job is not a job for the weak. It's not a job for the faint. And if you don't have the respect and the fear of criminals, they will take over. Now, there are people who say, well, fear, it shouldn't be fear. It's not good. People should want. That's crazy. It doesn't work. And I can explain that for you real briefly. It's kind of like the chief I used to work for used to say. He said he used to work in a jurisdiction. There was a little old lady, and she would push a grocery cart through the neighborhood every day, full of money, and no one ever robbed her. And you know why? Because they knew whose money it was. And they knew if they robbed her, they knew that consequences were going to be quick and severe. And he said that's how you have to police, because if criminals don't know that punishment is going to be quick and severe, they're going to take over.
Right.
And that's what happened. So during that particular time, anyone knew if they brought drugs in that jail, anyone knew if they brought any craziness in the county, they knew that consequences was going to be swift and severe. Now they know there's no consequences.
Right.
Now they know.
Right.
They know Barney Fife is in charge.
Right. So now you got, we can identify that the current sheriff as it exists right now is way, way above this is not his depth at all.
I agree.
This is something that is, at this point in time, I don't know how he survives any type of challenge from anybody really at this point, because it's just so bad. But because we're not talking about the training that has got to be piss poor, mismanaged, we got to go ahead and talk about the budget. So let's talk about that a little bit, about the budget. Did you have the budget that he had?
He has probably about $10 million more in his budget than I did. They think they gave him an additional $8 to $10 million, and I think he has an additional 60 to 80 more employees than I have. So his budget is much bigger than mine. He has more employees, and he claims that he doesn't have enough people on these lines.
That's what he's claiming, right?
Right. Well, let me tell you.
How do you square that?
Okay, easy. Okay, if you hire your mother, if you hire your girlfriends, if you hire the guy that's your best man in your wedding, and you put them in correction officer positions, but you don't put them in a jail, it's not that you don't have enough people. is that you're giving people paid positions that's supposed to be in the jail, but instead you got them doing other things. I mean, he hired a girl and put her in a correctional position, but her job is to give massages because she was a masseuse. So imagine she's in a correction officer position, but she doesn't have to go to jail. All she gets to do is give massages. Okay. That doesn't mean you don't have enough people, because I had more than enough people to handle the jail when I was there. We didn't have any problems like that. And you'll see video of how clean and how orderly the jail was. But if you take those people and you don't put them where they're supposed to be, that's it. If you take a secretary and a clerk and you put them through a 8-week class and say, okay, you're correction officer certified, so I'm going to put you in a correction officer slot so you can make that money, but you don't have to go to jail. You can continue being a secretary. Now you've taken 50 or 60 people who are supposed to be manning the jail, but they're doing everything else. So it's not that he's short, it's that he's not allocating the manpower as it's supposed to be allocated. So that's a lie. And if you take cars that's supposed to go to deputies and you give them to secretaries, you give them to clerks, you give them to your girlfriends, you give them to your cousins, you give them to your cousin that works in food services, even though he's not a deputy, you hire your aunts and you make sure they get take-on cars. But the actual deputies that are on the street, they don't have a car, so that your family and friends and girlfriends can have a car. That's not a shortage. That's misallocation. And that's literally what's going on there.
So we understand that he's the top law enforcement officer in Clayton County. He owns the keys, the policies, the staffing, the safety.
And name only. Right. Keep going. Yeah.
At this point in time, right? So, I mean, he chose that he wanted the transparency. But I'm putting additional blame on the Clayton County commissioners. I'm putting additional blame on the Georgia state legislators. I'm putting additional blame on even DOJ, because if you take a look at what they did in Fulton County, you let one guy get murdered in the cell in Clayton County, they put DOJ right over there. You got, over 7 people dead in Clayton County jail? What do you do then?
Yeah, well, you got to understand who was over the DOJ. That was a guy named Ron Buchanan who mysteriously resigned when the president came in. But remember this about Buchanan. In my case, I never touched anybody, never did anything. And he and the DA, Tasha Mosley, was very adamant that I'm supposed to be criminally prosecuted. Well, he goes to the Fulton County Jail and he admits they're violating human rights. They're tasing people. They're whatever. But he said, you know what? We're going to make them get it right in the next 6 months. Sign a dissent decree. So you're saying that you let these folks tase people, beat people for not using the phone, but they get a dissent decree. In my case, I'm sent to prison and I haven't even touched anybody. And then we see all the civil rights violations we got here in Clayton County. The ACLU just wrote a letter talking about the civil rights violations. So are they going to lock up this guy too?
Well, that's my point.
So you see the imbalance of it.
Exactly.
Right.
It is imbalance.
If we like you or whatever, but really, and the only thing we can blame the commission on is this. I can't say we can blame them because they funded and given him everything he needs. He's just wasted it. The only thing we can blame the commission on is this. There was a guy who was the chairman named Jeff Turner. He wanted to be sheriff. He and the DA are friends. He couldn't win the election. He tried years ago. He couldn't win it. His only hope to be it was to get me out the way. So he and the DA colluded to come up with anything they could to get me out. So they come up with this outlandish thing about the restraint chair. They bring this to Buchanan, who, this guy, we know he resigned because he was involved in another political prosecution with the DA in Fulton County against the president. So that's the type of stuff they were doing. And they just happen to be friends with this federal court judge. So if we're going to blame the commission, we can blame him for colluding with the DA. And by doing this, look at the destruction they've come. This restraint chair is no longer being used now. You look at the destructive stuff there. It couldn't happen because anybody who was violent, anybody who made threats, they were restrained for safety. So they couldn't tear up the jail. They couldn't kill each other. The reason the people, they weren't having 7 murders like they got now is all the violent people are being restrained. The reason they could not destroy the jail like they're destroying it now is because we restrained people who were destroying property. It works. So if it didn't work, then, and what they were saying was true, then we shouldn't have 7 dead bodies, stabbings, gang rapes, a destroyed jail. So now you've taken away a tool because you made up a crime to come after me. And not only have you destroyed the jail, Not only have you gotten people raped, robbed, and murdered, you've essentially destroyed and now bankrupting the community.
And this is where my pushback is with the county commissioners. Okay, why aren't they demanding federal rights investigation? Why aren't they demanding Georgia's ACLU?
They are,
Or
but not all of them. The chair lady is, but here's what gets real funny. The guy who's a sheriff now, his wife is a commissioner, so that might be one reason why she's not doing it. She's actually saying give him more money. She's actually running interference. Something came up about some accounts he hasn't turned over to the commissioners, and she's on tape asking, well, is it taxpayers' money? And then she's on tape saying, well, what happens if he doesn't turn it over? So now the commissioners, the one who are actually wanting to look into it, and which may only be two, they're having to file stuff to see if they can see exactly what's in those accounts he hasn't turned over to them. Meanwhile, you got his wife and her allies on there fighting to cover it up. It's a horrible situation, and it goes to show you, I'm sure we're going to have to probably do another part because there's not enough time, but it goes to show you when lawfare is used, when you got DAs and politicians using the criminal justice system to target a person, look at the ripple effect. Look at the domino effect.
Mhm. So this is where if the commissioners are in that situation, okay, then what you need to do is have them go ahead and say, hey, we might be fighting amongst ourselves, but we're going to go ahead and have other community leaders. Let's go have them step up and do their part. You can use the viral the documentation that we've just seen to go ahead and expose not only the Eighth Amendment rights and violations, but also the 14th Amendment violations that are going on. And you can go ahead and put pressure on DOJ, because usually DOJ don't even step in no how, no way until there's something substantial or there's press involved with it.
Well, remember, there's two DOJs. There's the DOJ that was weaponized, and that's a fact. And then now there's a new DOJ. So let's just pray the new DOJ gets a whiff of this and they can look into it. The old DOJ, when Ryan Buchanan was there, was fixated on me. Other people could beat people, whatever, and they would do no prosecution, like Gwinnett County. But with me, hey, if he's standing there, hey, if he talked to a guy in the restraint chair, we got to send him to prison. No record. Even the judge at the end of the case, who was a part of this, of rigging the trial, even she said at sentencing, we've never seen a case like this. There's never been a civil suit up until now. The ones pending against you, which was coordinated. I'm adding that one in. And she said, usually these cases have assaultive behavior, and none of which occurred in this case. She even had to admit,
she said this was a novel case.
No one. But she was still trying to find a way to justify what they had done and what they rigged. But the crazy part is, look, you come after me, and look at the damage. Look how many people have been stabbed, raped, robbed, murdered, and look at the overall effects on the county. And that's what happens if you get a DA that gets more concentrated on prosecuting people for politics, or choosing who gets prosecuted and not, and using the system for lawfare instead of what it's intended to be used for. And that's how we ended up where we're at now.
So what we're going to do is we send an open invite to Tommy G to come on to the show. Certainly want to talk to him about some of the aspects of that video that we want to go ahead and the things that weren't filmed, that we can go ahead and bring some more clarity to. If you like this conversation, there's going to be more of this conversation, especially of that viral video that came out inside Atlanta's craziest jail. I'm Jerome Hill, retired Sheriff Victor Hill. We appreciate you, and until next time.